Good evening, good morning. My name is Mary Thayer. I am an alcoholic, and this is fun. Bubba and I were just talking about, he was here yesterday and I was too, and he said, well, this is the first time I've done this. And I said, well, it's the first time I've done it. And, on Zoom, I think that there are people at some of our meetings that come in from other countries, but actually to go to a country with you folks that I don't know is new for me. So that's great. The one thing is that I think this is a language of the heart. And I feel as though that's the gift that this program actually gives all of us, is that we might not know each other, but we know each other very well. If you have this disease, I have had the privilege. I was asked one time to go to a little island in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean to bring a weekend about the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I agreed. And this was I don't know how many years ago, but maybe about 7 years ago. And at the time, there's a woman on here this morning. In fact, I'm staying with her here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a woman that I sponsor, and she and I went. We flew into Copenhagen, and then we flew to this little tiny island called the Faroe Islands. And it turned out we were the first Americans to bring a book study to the Faroe Islands. They had the language of the book. They were using Denmark, and they're now interpreting the book into their own dialect. And I imagine that's what happens in India, is that you have the big book and it's been interpreted. And now you're asking some of us to come in and share how we saw it. Devin is quite a young man that I've loved and got to meet because when the COVID started and we started these meetings, because he had nothing to do, he decided to do service. And he's an inspiration, as I imagine we heard him yesterday, and he is a demonstration of service for this program. And he started, I think it was the Fellowship of the Spirit New York conference on, and he asked myself and was that it, Devin? It was, wasn't it? And he asked myself and several other friends to share at that conference. And it was like a first time for us to be sharing to others on Zoom. Since then, he's done so much service with this, and thank God, because some of us old timers had a lot of contempt prior to investigation about what the heck Zoom was, and as a result of that, I have been blessed to meet others. And so when he called me, I just saw him at the Colorado Fellowship of the Spirit conference. And when he called and asked me to do this, absolutely, because I respect what he's doing in this program. He's taken this seriously. So I got sober. Looks like this is a male stag, to be honest with you. Is there ever any women that sober up over there? I hope so. But meanwhile, I will tell you my story. When I got sober, I was quite young. And my alcoholism and alcoholics was not something that is as popular as it is today to get recovery from. And I was raised in the part of this country, it's called the Northeast or New England. It's a very proper area. You're supposed to kind of be seen and not heard. And you definitely, a woman was not someone that had anything to say. And I was raised by a father that should have been my grandfather. I mean, he was in the First World War, for heaven's sakes. And he really didn't have to think too much about women and what they did or anything. It was really, he educated me and wanted me to go to secretarial school so I would support my husband. And that I was a non-entity, if you will, and just not supposed to do anything. All you men were the ones that were important. Unfortunately, he didn't get a son. He got a daughter, and he had 3 daughters, and I was the youngest. And he was out of having kids, and we had quite a time. He had a lot of money, property, prestige, and I didn't act the way I was supposed to. And so they sent me away to school, and I went away to school, and that's where I discovered alcohol. And I didn't know at the time that alcohol, hello? Hello?
Go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. I didn't know that I was alcoholic at that time. All I knew is that I knew how to make, I don't know if you have this over there, but apple cider you can make into hard cider, which is got alcohol content. And I knew how to make that at like 13, 14 years old. And I think back and I go, how the heck did I even know that? But I knew that when I drank, I felt like I could be proper. It was like I could do what you wanted me to do. And so it worked for me. And so from then on, I wasn't like a daily drinker, but I sought to have, I always had to have some on hand. So I learned how to steal from my father's liquor cabinet and bring it back to school. And I learned how to hide it from all the rest of the people, and so that I would be okay. So it became my solution, I think. And it was a good solution. It made me feel okay. And so I do believe that the disease of alcoholism is progressive. It is, and I believe that our recovery is progressive, which is kind of what I want to talk about today. Mine progressed to the point where I did everything wrong according to society that I was raised in. First of all, I was a woman, and then I got pregnant and married in that order, which was not proper. And then the man that I married, the father of my child, he was an alcoholic because water seeks its own level. We usually are attracted to whoever we're around. And I was attracted to him, and he was very attractive, to be honest with you. And unfortunately, he was not the fun type of alcoholic. And I ended up as a battered wife, which they call nowadays. My weekend guest would be the police, because I would be calling them just to get help. And I had my daughter, and by the time she was 9 months old, it was kind of a regular scene for me to be beaten up and the police arriving. One day, after he beat me up, he picked up my daughter, who was, about 8, 9 months old, and drove off with her. And there was like something that happened inside of me where I said, I can't have this happen to my daughter. And so I called that home, my mother and father, and I asked if I could come home. And they let me come home, which was really a wonderful thing when you think back about it. And so I took my daughter and went back to this lovely area that my folks lived in. It was my folks were quite accomplished. My father was commodore of the yacht club. We lived next to the yacht club, and it was like all this, a lot of externals, in other words. And I found it very hard to be at the yacht club trying to talk about what the heck had happened to me over the last few years. I was with a child. Actually, I was like a child having a child. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what was proper to say. And alcohol came to the rescue one more time. And it took away all of that pain that I had experienced for the previous 2 years or wherever. And every night when I would get back, I started working. My mother would take care of my child, and when I got home and I got her to bed, I would leave, and they would say, come home at a proper hour. And the progression of alcoholism had gotten me to the point that I wanted to come home. I mean, this was like in the 60s, 1960s, for God's sakes. And it wasn't proper to be without, not married. And my former husband was absolutely a drunk, and he wasn't paying child support. And it was wonderful. I mean, I had a wonderful place to raise a daughter. And I was unable, because the progression in the disease, I then could not come home when I should come home, because once I had one, I had to have another until they said last call. And unfortunately, my as much as they'd say, Mary Thea, we can't have this, you have to be home, this is not right, you're not right for you to be coming in at 1 o'clock in the morning drunk, you can't be doing this. If you can't stop this, we're going to have to ask you to leave. And that's what happened. They had to ask me to leave. And I remember we lived on kind of a section that was an island off of this town. And I went back over to town and got an apartment and drank at them. How dare they do this to me? And my ego started to go that I was right and they were wrong. And after about 4 or 5 years there, I mean, my daughter was, I think, about 4.5. My reputation as a woman caught up with me, and I had to get away. So I picked up that daughter, and I had a friend who was an airline stewardess, and she lived in California. And I flew to California to live, and took my daughter away from my folks, everything. I just knew what I knew. I just thought I knew everything. And the last 5 years of my drinking, I could give you all the episodes, but I'm pretty sure women that were like me. And unfortunately, not only was I a woman alcoholic, but I was a mother alcoholic. And as the last 5 years of my drinking was pretty bad. And by then the progression had gotten to the point that I was coming out of blackouts, yelling at the only thing I love most in this world, was this child. And I thought, well, I won't just be around my child when I drink. So I decided that I would go to bars and I would drink. And therefore I needed a babysitter. And there was an apartment building I was in. There was a woman who had a teenager that I met when we were one day. And I said, would you mind watching my daughter while I'm going to go out and have a drink, which was not a big deal. I mean, this was, as in the late 60s, early 70s, 97. That was it's cocktail hour. You always do that. And so I left my daughter, and I would say, I'll be back in an hour. And of course, I couldn't be back in an hour. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't do what I wanted to do. I had to have more. And I kept calling and saying, would you watch my daughter for another hour? And all sorts of things happened during that time. And they would always say, the babysitter said, yes, we will. And then they'd finally say, why don't you leave her overnight? And I would be just so grateful for that. And so this went on, and my progression went on. It turned out, in order to get a job in California, you had to take a typing test. And when I put my hands on the keys to take that test, my hands were all over the place, and I couldn't understand that I had the shakes, and I didn't know what was going on with me. And then I went to a doctor, and the doctor said, are you alcoholic? And I thought, no, I'm not alcoholic. I had a job. I thought I was fine. And he said, okay, well, we have this wonderful little pill for you. And it was called Valium. And in those days, I didn't know what Valium was. All I knew is that when I came to see, I was a daily drinker and a periodic drunk. But when I would drink, I would pass out, I would come to. And then after I came to, I would take one of these Valiums that would allow me to sleep, to get up to do the same thing the next day. So I was a daily drinker and a periodic drunk, and it just kept going on and on. And during that time, I don't know what was happening to me. I didn't know what was happening to me. And I had this, I look back at this and I think to myself, my God, what a time that was. Nobody really knew me, so that was great. I wasn't in a town where everybody knew who my father and mother were or anything. So obviously, I got myself into areas that were horrendous, just horrendous. And one day, I'm not going to bring this out so long for you. All I want you to know is that I ended up in hospitals. They'd give me more Valium to use. I was sleeping with a knife between my box spring and mattress to ward off whatever was trying to get me at night. I had no idea that was the DTs. I did not understand what alcoholism was, and it was not advertised like it is today. And so one morning I went over to pick up my daughter, and the door opened, and the babysitter wasn't there, but the babysitter's mother was there. And she said, "Hi, Mary." She said, "My name is Rosemary. We really haven't met each other and gotten to know each other. We know your daughter very well, but why don't you come in and have a cup of coffee?" And in that moment, I can remember that I thought to myself, would it be a good thing to find out who's watching my daughter? And, and I went in there and she gave me some coffee and she started to talk to me. And she told me that she was raised in Massachusetts, which was the state I was raised in, and that she had gone to a very prestigious school called MIT, and she was an engineer. And I thought, wow, this is good stuff. I mean, this is pretty good what's happening here. And she's told me she was an engineer at Lockheed, which was a big company in California. And I was impressed. And I said, well, wonderful. And she said, and I'm also an alcoholic. I belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went, what? And she said, yes. And she told me her story. And when she was done telling me her story, the progression of disease is not only physical, it's mental. And one of them is denial. Okay. And so when she finished her story, I said to her, oh my God, I know a lot of people who could use that program. And she said to me, yes, well, we have open meetings, whatever that meant. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. She said, there's one tonight. Why don't you come? And you see, this was 1973. It was September 13th, 1973, over 50 years ago, folks. And I went to my first meeting that night. What happened is that when I went in, I tried to get out of it. I tried to tell her I didn't know if I had a babysitter, but she assured me her daughter would babysit while I went to this open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I arrived at her apartment and her husband brought me to the meeting. She had a sponsor at that time who wanted her someplace else. I didn't know what she was talking about. What does that mean? But this nice man named David took me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a speaker meeting, very similar to this. And he walked into this room. It was amazing, though. It was it was a school place or an auditorium, and there were over 200 people there. And in California, when you go to them, these people clean up well. I mean, they look as though they're high society. They got a lot of bling. They, rings. I thought, well, this is very nice. Everybody wants to know about whatever this alcoholism thing is, an AA thing. And I had no idea that these people were all alcoholics. I just thought they were visiting like I was to find out something about this disease they call alcoholism. And so people would rush up and David would say, this is my Mary's first meeting. And they gave me literature and they had this little pamphlet called 20 Questions. And I thought, well, it's very nice. And somebody said, don't answer those questions now. Answer them one at a time when you're alone as best as you can. And I thanked them. And the meeting started and we sat down. And in California, when you go to an AA meeting, they give chips. I don't know if you do that in India or not, for lengths of sobriety. You do? Okay. And so they started off with giving people chips, and then they gave them anniversary cakes, so they call them birthday cakes, out there for years of sobriety. And it was very entertaining. I mean, they would, get up, they'd say something. They'd sing out of key, happy birthday. I thought, well, this is like a show. It's amazing. And it was very nice. And then they had the speaker, and the woman that spoke that night was a woman speaker. And I found out hindsight why there was over 200 people there, but I didn't know that then. But the woman her name was Sybil, and she was the first woman alcoholic to get sober west of the Mississippi River in the United States. And she's very, very influential in our program, especially with our third tradition. And she was an amazing woman. First of all, she got up and gave her name, and I guess she had been married about 5-6 times, and she named every single one of her last names. And she said, I really like to get married. And it started right off with humor. And then she went on and she talked about how she came in and how most of the men wanted her to be in whatever Al-Anon was. I didn't know those things. And then they finally let her into the halls, and she really gave an amazing talk. And as she was talking, there would be times when I wanted to just cry, because it was amazing to me what she went through. And also, I would be laughing at the same time. And I didn't understand these emotions, because when you're raised in New England, you're not supposed to laugh too loud. You're definitely not supposed to show any emotion about being sad or crying or anything. So I would just sit there, and I just was sitting there and kind of hanging on as she told her story. I realized the area that I want to mention this morning, and I usually mention it. Oops, you're falling down. She said that she had a brother who was sober, and his name was Tex. And she said, Tex said to her one day, Sybil, how are you doing? And she said, I'm fine, just fine. She said, but I was dying inside. And that was the line that brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. I looked as though I could do okay. I was young. I knew how to dress. I knew which fork to pick up. I was raised right, all those things, but I was dying inside. I had a hole in my gut, and the wind was blowing through. I didn't know what was happening. The world was crumbling around me, and I didn't know what was happening. And I had this mask that would make you think I was fine. But inside, I felt as though I was just dying inside. I felt as though, I remember hearing one time a couple of things that demonstrated what was happening inside of me. I was at the club after I got sober. I heard this man say that when he came in, he felt he had this false persona that he was a tough guy. He says, kind of like those suits that the knights used to wear. It was all metal and it had a visor, and he was protected and he was strong. He said, but if you lifted up that visor and looked in, you'd see a little person going, help, 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 help. And that was exactly the way I felt. So that was a line that I nearly started crying about. But then as she went on, we'd be laughing about something. So I had these myriad emotions that were just going on with me. Now, this would have been a time that you take a drink so you don't show anybody anything. But obviously, there was no booze around. So when she finished talking, David, who brought me, said to me, Mary, how do you feel? And I said, I could cry. And he said, go ahead. And all of a sudden, I'm sobbing in this meeting, which I couldn't understand what was happening to me. And he walked me up to Sybil and he said, Sybil, this is Mary's first meeting. And she turned around. I remember she looked right through me and said, welcome home, honey. Whew. I not then, but now know what those things meant to me, because I used to say those things. I said, why do I say those? People don't think they're home when they get to AA anymore, and blah, 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 and all this other stuff. But you see, this is my story, and I get to share with you exactly what's happened to me. What I realized for myself that night was it was the first time in my life that anybody had said to me, how do you feel? they'd say to me, what do you think? Or they'd tell me how I'm supposed to think or how I'm supposed to feel. Nobody had asked me, how do you feel? It's the first time anybody had done that for me. Second thing that happened to me is that when Sybil turned and looked at me, she was a woman who had depth of weight. She knew what she was talking about. She knew what this program was about. And she knew how much I felt as though I was such a disgrace as a woman and as a mother. She knew how I felt. And she went right through that false face, that false facade I was projecting onto you people that my life was okay. And she went right into my soul and said, welcome home. And in that moment, I felt she cared. I didn't know that at that time. All I knew was that there was something strange that had happened to me at that moment. I went home. He left a copy of the big book on my coffee table. He said, come join us tomorrow and have coffee. Because he had asked me on the way home, he said, do you think you're alcoholic? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, it's a progressive disease. And it's kind of like taking a bus. You can get on the bus here and you can get off at the next stop in North Hollywood, or you can take it all the way to Skid Row. Because if you are alcoholic, it's progressive. And then the next morning, that night after he left, I answered those 20 questions that the pamphlet was given to me. And I just did it quickly. And then all of a sudden it said at the end, it said, if you've answered 3 of these questions, yes, you are an alcoholic. And I quickly counted and I had answered 17 yes.
Yeah,
and it was at that moment I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. And the denial, it was kind of like I got a crack in, I sometimes say that we're all like little acorns. You know, I have this little acorn I wear around my neck. It's a little nut off of a tree here in the United States, and it has a crusty little cap on the top of it. And that it's like we're all born perfect, like the acorn, completely smooth. And then as we grow in our life, our parents tell us what to do, our teachers, our gurus, our priests, our rabbis, you know, everybody tells us what to do and how to act and what society is. And yet we are all perfect inside. Deep down inside is this fundamental idea of this presence or this God. And then it gets caught up with how everybody wants us to act. And so when I had that feeling happen and so forth, when I said, oh my God, I'm alcoholic, it was like somebody came along and cracked the top of that acorn and a little light got in. And for the last 50 years, I've been trying to take pieces of that damn acorn cap off and find out who I am really and who God wants me to be. And that's exactly what this program is about. Now, I didn't know that then, because your recovery is progressive, just as your drinking was progressive. And I used to say, if you walk 7 miles into the woods, you have to walk 7 miles out of the woods. So that's just normal. And perhaps that, so now I'm going to tell you, basically, I went back over the next morning, had coffee. This woman started screaming at me. Yes, she'd waited for me for 1.5 years, and I was an alcoholic, and I was going to do this. And she had a sponsor by the name of Clancy that would tell them exactly what to do. And you know, and she was dragging me to meetings every night. I was trying to tell her, oh, I should have been thrown into a detox at that time. But in 1973, they didn't do that. They didn't have these 30-day programs or anything else. So what we did is we sobered up on the bricks, as we call it. And they gave me orange juice and honey to stop my shakes. Didn't work. I mainlined that stuff and it didn't work. I was still jumping out of my skin. And it was horrendous, you know. And they would say to me, you only have to go through this once. Hang on to your ass and carry it out, you know, and shake it out. And I'd be going, okay. And then they'd bring you these meetings and they'd read things and people would get up and they'd laugh and they'd hug you. Oh, heavens. this is not New England by any means. We don't show emotions. It was really a rough deal. And she kept telling me I had to get a sponsor because I was due to go back to my father's 75th birthday in Massachusetts. And I was going to be like 37 days sober. And she told me I'd get drunk if I didn't have a sponsor that was into something called the Big Book. And oh my God, it was like, I was insane. Anybody having detox? I had a bad detox and I didn't have anything to cool it, so to speak. And it was rough. She told me, she said to me, "Are you on any drugs?" And I said, "I don't do drugs." And she said, "You're not on any Valium or Librium?" She must have been going through my medicine cabinet. And I said, "Well, I have to take Valium." Says, "Why?" It's because I ended up in the hospital. She says, "No, that's a dry drink." I did not like her. I felt she was a little too harsh. But she had said she'd been waiting for me for a year and a half. They had been taking care of my daughter as I spiraled down the alcoholic hole. Hindsight, it's wonderful that Alcoholics Anonymous took care of my daughter for the last year and a half of my recovery. Of my drinking. And a lot since I have come in. So I've got 50 years here of how do we get emotionally stable. We get a cake every year for physical sobriety. I don't know about emotional stability, but we do get a cake for having at least stayed sober. And that's going to have to be the first thing. How do I want to say this now? I had to let you know I didn't just get to AA because I burnt the toast one day after a martini. I really was very, very ill when I came in. Very ill. And very deluded. And although I thought I knew everything, I knew nothing. And yet I'm grateful for a loving God, as was expressed to me the first meeting I went to. You see, I felt a loving God as he expresses himself in our group conscience in my very first meeting. I felt safe with you people. I remember I used to want to go to meetings because the minute the meeting started, I'd just feel safe. For an hour and a half, I could just listen to people. And in those days, I was very blessed because there was a man who's a very big person in our recovery that was I'd see him once a month at least. And his name was Chuck Chamberlain. And he wrote a book called A New Pair of Glasses. And he was a giant, a hero in our program. He definitely was. In fact, some of the long-timers didn't want people to go hear him because he was too godlike. But I loved this man. He had this infectious laugh. It was just amazing when he'd talk. So I want to tell you about how, I found a sponsor. After 2 or 3 weeks, I left that group that Rosemary was in. I didn't want her as a sponsor. I knew that much. And I went to a little meeting, and it was a book study. And at that little meeting, I'm saying little meeting, there was about 30 people, but compared to Clancy's group, forget it. Crazy there. Oh my God, it was too much energy for me. I'm too much of an introvert. So I went to this book study, and this man afterwards was selling this thing, Big Book, and Rosemary wanted me to find somebody that was in the program for a while that was into the Big Book. And so I thought, great. So I bought the book from him, and he sold me the book. And the next week, he told me a long story about the book. He told me about how the black lines of this book were going to be the way I'm going to stay sober. That this was a program, and this was our textbook. And he was very quiet about it. It was lovely. And the story he told me was very funny about how he realized that he was trying to find a way out with reading the black lines, and how his sponsor kind of showed him that he knew nothing and that it was going to take some time for him to understand what these black lines meant in this big book. I was so excited to get my big book. I went home. Rosemary said, "Have you got a sponsor?" I said, "I think so." And she said, "Are they into the big book?" I went, "Yes, I think I know." And so the next week, I went to ask Q to be my sponsor. And after the meeting, he said, "How are you doing this week?" I was like a week and a half, 2 weeks sober, for God's sakes, going. Everybody was kind of wondering if I was going to make it. And I said, "I'm okay." I said, "I want to know if you'll sponsor me." And he looked at me with kindness. Oh, thank you, God, for some of those giants. And he said, "My wife doesn't cotton to me sponsoring women." And he said, "So she's that redhead over there, and she has kind of a Mickey Mouse program, but maybe she'll help you out." And I went over and I asked this woman if she'd sponsor me. And she said, "You just asked my husband to sponsor you?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "What'd you do that for?" And so I told her this whole story, that I was going to get drunk if I didn't have a sponsor, and I had to go back east and blah, blah, blah. And she looked at me. She probably thought, this one's crazier than ever. And she said, "You come to my house with the big book and the 12 and 12 next Tuesday." She said, "We'll get you back to Massachusetts. And when you come back, you look around, you look for somebody that you want what they have, and you're willing to do anything to get it," just kind of what we said here when we read how it works. You're willing to go to any lengths. Are you ready for certain stuff? Are you ready? Are you ready to go to certain, you have to be able to have some form of understanding that these 12 steps. Now, she didn't tell me this, but now I realize it. When she said, "You want what we have," that meant I had to think for myself, didn't I? She didn't say to me, "You want what we have." She didn't say that. Rosemary said that, but Beverly didn't say that to me. She said, "If you want what we have, then you're ready to do this program." See, this is a program of people who want it, not for people who need it. If you want this program, I promise you, you've got it already, because you see your real sponsor is deep down inside you, which I'm pretty sure, being from India, you all realize there's an essence that is kind of flowing, probably more so than we in the United States. I had the great privilege of following a woman by the name of Amritananda Maya, Amachi from India. And I can remember she is part of my growth in the kindness, the feeling that I felt when I first went into a meeting. And when I had the opportunity, when I was about 17 years sober, to experience being with her several years in a row while I was here in New Mexico. She comes here to New Mexico. I didn't even know what people kept saying. "You got to go see Amachi." Who's that? I didn't have any idea. But you see, this is the big gift. And I'm going to just say it right now, because this is hopefully what I'm going to talk about. I have a plan. I don't know what God's plan is on what I'm going to say to you. But it's in our ABCs on what we read this morning. See, I had to know that I was alcoholic and I couldn't manage my own life. That means that I have to have I have to surrender to that innermost thing, as it talks about on page 30 of our book. We had to admit to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. That's what happened to me that first night when I answered those questions. I went, "Oh my God, I'm an alcoholic." It was like, that was a thought out there, but it wasn't personal to me. So when I admitted that, and then it says, and I had to, probably no human power can relieve my alcoholism. I'm a human power. I can't do it. Okay? So there has to be something outside. And I had no idea, because I wasn't raised with a religion, so to say. I was raised with the idea money, property, and prestige will help you, but it doesn't if you're in a spiritual program. You've got to admit that there's a power greater than yourself. In fact, our tradition says that money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have money, property, and prestige, but if that's what you're worshiping, that ain't going to work in this program. Just is not going to work. And so it says that God could and would if he were sought. Now, I had an advantage because I really did not have anybody when I was young telling me what God was. Okay. A lot of people had to get through the acorn cap there of what their parents told them God was or whatever, but they didn't know who. I didn't know what it was, but I did know one thing, and I think this is what I like. It says this is a program of attraction, not promotion. Please hear me on that. It's not whether or not I can tell you everything, because I, for a long time, thought the people like Chuck Chamberlain who would talk at these meetings, he would say things like this. This is one of the first things I heard. He said, did you ever notice that everything grows from the inside out? The trees, the bushes, the flowers, everything grows from the inside out. It's only the human being trying to get something outside of them to put into them to make them feel better. You know, they don't call alcohol spirits for nothing. It's just the wrong spirit. It's the wrong spirit. And here we're going to work with a power that is different, and it's deep. It's going to be connected, not out there, but within. It was a feeling I felt when 17 years when I still am seeking. I'm 50 years sober and I'm a seasoned beginner, let me tell you, because if it's true what it says on page 129, that Father has struck something better than gold, it's a limitless load that will continue to pay me dividends as long as I mine it for the rest of my life. I want the dividends. I have received things I didn't even know I wanted because I continue to seek those ABCs. When they're read, just don't let them be read. Really think about, how am I seeking? What's happening? Have I settled for a God that's, Heather, who's on here, we had this friend that was a priest, and he used to say, am I spiritual or are things just going my way? That'll wake you up a little bit. Because if you stay sober, and as my book tells me, if I fail to enlarge on my spiritual conception, it doesn't say concept, conception means to grow. If I fail to enlarge on that, I will not be able to face the certain trials and low spots ahead. So that was like a key. God would have saw it. I have to enlarge on whatever this God is. We have a whole step on that. We have 2 steps. Came to believe there was something and made a decision to turn my will and my lives over to the care of it, that presence. Okay. And it usually says a God of my understanding. I'm here to tell you I do not understand God. In fact, if I understood God, I'd probably be God. That's the one line I wish they would change in our book. It's the God of my experience. I have had experience with that presence. I told you the very first one I had was with that woman who looked right through and knew how I felt and touched my soul. It took me 20 years in this program of reading this book. I could memorize. I had it almost memorized. I have one of those minds that I can tell you what page it's on. I don't know. I didn't create that to be something with you. In those days, we did not have cell phones. We did not have computers. We didn't even have phones that had answering machines on them. And so the first page of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's nothing on it. And I was told that as I read the black lines in this book and something jumps off the page at me, such as, I'm going to give you something, came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that would restore us to sanity, made a decision to turn my will and my lives over to the care of God. How many times have you read that? And did you realize that will has no S on it? I don't know if you spell the same way over there, but it does not say my wills and my lives. It says my will and my lives. So what that meant to me as time went on was that I originally came in here. I said the words, I didn't understand what I was saying. I had a surrender to alcohol and I stayed sober because of people like yourselves that brought me to meetings that I listened to, that cared for me, that showed me what the black lines were, that helped me to try to do these steps. You do these steps poorly until you do them well. If you wait to do them perfectly, you will not do them at all. So I did these steps very poorly, but I did them and I got an effect from just the action of trying to do what they were saying or what I believed they were saying for a while. And then I realized this power, had I turned all things over to God? No, I had turned maybe my problem with being a mother over to God. So that was one of my lives, you see? And I had worked steps through being a mother. It took me 32 years of steps before I really understood what it was to be a mother, because I had a lot of problems and shame. I'm a woman and I'm a mother and I'm a drunk. I had a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And it took a long time of doing these steps. But every single time I did these steps, I would have some spiritual growth. I would have some emotional sobriety about what was happening. Because I realized that in order to transform who I am, I was going to have to go through some necessary suffering. And that's in your 6th, 7th step. It's necessary for us to just even think, today we're all sitting here and we're sober, hopefully. It took some suffering to get sober, didn't it? Physically. So what's the suffering going to be in order to find emotional sobriety? Am I willing to go to any lengths? Am I willing to experience some pain, some ego deflation at depth, as Devin was talking about yesterday? Am I willing to look at things from a different angle? Or do I still think I'm right? So what first happened to me is that I would read these things, I would write on that first page, and I have a first page in the copy here. Page 13 and page 42 tells me something. It says that the spiritual way of life, these spiritual principles, will solve all my problems. It does not just say spiritual way of life will solve all my problems. So that's where the emotional sobriety started to come in for me. I liked how the big book repeats itself. I've been having fun kind of as the years have gone on, as to see, oh, it says it there and it says it there. The same thing kind of in a different way, but it says the same thing because I'm kind of thick. I don't understand that. I used to think that if I knew every line in this book, that I'd be okay and I'd never drink again and I'd be right, I guess. Anyways, but actually on page 7, I think it talks about that there was that self-knowledge is good, but it doesn't go far enough. Self-knowledge is not the answer. It isn't the answer at all. It doesn't make any difference how smart we are with things. As I said, 20 years of doing that. My problem had to do with the second step. What have I actually come to believe in? What have I come to restore me to some sound thinking and, balance? And I realized I had taken what you people told me was. I hadn't really sat with that. And it came out of Bill's story when it said, Bill turned all things into his newfound friend. Now that was probably the gift that I got at 20 years. Did I consider this power greater than myself as a friend? This is just what happened to me. I was sitting, I was looking at that line, and I said, well, no, I think God is all powerful, all omnipotent, the intellectual, whatever God was. But I had never brought in the idea, what is a friend? Now, I am blessed to have a friend that I have known since I was 5 years old. We grew up in the same place. When I had 6 years of recovery, she became sober, and I have sponsored her for the last 45 years. Okay? I know what a friend is. In fact, if she popped on here right now, she'd go. It would be okay. We'd feel okay. It was a feeling. It was a feeling that I was safe. A friend is somebody that is safe, that we can tell anything to. They really don't care. They'll just love us no matter what and say, well, maybe you better stop that, or, you better stop doing the things that hurt you. But there would be no judgment with a friend. And I hadn't considered that this power greater than myself as a friend. So for the last 30 years, I have been working with the conception of this God of my experience as a friend, not as someone that would send me someplace bad, or I don't even know what. A lot of Catholic people, they get really afraid of places they're going afterwards. I think I'm going where my friends are, to be honest with you. And but that took a lot of time for me to see things. So anyways, and then it was kind of a hint after a couple of times through the big book. I saw on page 25 there's a solution, and that we have a kit of spiritual tools that have been laid at our feet, and that we have seen demonstrated for us that this could maybe be the thing that would help us. And so gradually I started to understand that. And then after it says that, it says something to the effect that we only have like 2 solutions. We can go on to the bitter end, trying to blot out whatever is intolerable to us, or we can accept spiritual help. So again, it kept going back and forth. There's no third door. You can either accept your misery, or you can accept that there has to be a power greater than yourself that you can work with. And it talks about that on page 45. The main object of our book is to find a God that you can do business with, that'll do business with you. Now, I didn't know what that was, but when I finally understood it as a friend, then I realized the whole steps are to enable me to develop a relationship with that presence, that very kind presence. And that as I've gone on with this, and it says it at the last sentence of to the agnostics, it says something to the effect of, as we grow closer to God, he will reveal himself to us. And God works through people. So you people have to bring to me. So when I go into a meeting, we have this moment of silence, and then we say the serenity prayer. In the moment of silence, I say, God, please use me as an instrument. And please, God, make everybody in this meeting, meaning you guys all sitting here, stag meeting people, that you have to be an instrument for me. Do you ever notice that sometimes you go to a meeting and you might have, maybe 3 weeks, or you might have 3 years or 30 years or 50 years, that the person who has the least amount of sobriety is the one you identify with? Or it's someone that someone you don't even like, and all of a sudden they say some brilliant thing, and all of a sudden you go, yeah, well, that's because God's using whatever person that comes into my life for me for the day. So I have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of this belief structure that I am working with today. My book told me that I had to let go of several lifelong conceptions. So, and that I had to let go of my old ideas, and the results were nil until I let go absolutely. And then it told me it was a daily program. What is happening? What does that all mean? That means that maybe the God of my understanding or my belief structure last week is not the one that I need today. I need to enlarge on it. Am I ready to do that? Am I really doing a daily reprieve? Or am I just resting on my laurels and thinking because I have 50 years, I don't have to do this anymore? I don't know about you, Bubba. You've had some time and I've had some time, but I'm pretty sure you're still doing the deal here, doing the drill every day. I'm doing the drill. It's kind of like you get out of bed, you know, and you brush your teeth and you comb your hair. It's kind of like I get out of bed and I hear myself say, oh God, will you direct my thinking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives? My thought life then is on a higher plane because I've gotten rid of me for a minute. And usually what happens is that I can think of something other than myself. And I ask, give me some inspiration, intuitive thought. Definitely give me some power to carry that out, because the older I get, the more power I need from God, not myself. And then I relax and take it easy. I don't know what my next step is to be. Once you get retired, you don't have to worry about that. Then you can ask, what am I supposed to do next? You know, and usually something happens. I realize that every day is a day that I'm going to have self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. That's why every day I have to ask God to remove that. I used to think that was a one-time shot. You know, I used to think 10, 11, and 12 were optional. They aren't. It's part of the 12-step program. And once you get to step 10, and I know Devin talked about that, once you've kind of taken a look at what you've been up to and what your values and morals are, as it says in am I over time? No, I've got a few more minutes, don't I? I'm okay?
You're absolutely
I want
okay.
to say that, you know, I didn't know what living in the world of the spirit was because I did not have a relationship with that spirit at the time. So in the beginning, I followed and did it poorly until I started to feel something happen inside of me. When I got to the 4th step and they said to write a fearless moral inventory, I had wonderful sponsorship, and my sponsor told me what that meant. It does not say to write a fearful garbage inventory. It doesn't say that. It says to write a fearless moral inventory. And this is where it says, you know, where it says in the book, where the book is meant to find a God. And that means that we are going to talk about things that are spiritual as well as moral on page 45. Now we're going to go into the morals. What are your morals and where have you been going against them? What are your values and where have you been going against them? Now, when I did that as a parent, I looked at myself and what I did was against my value system. What I didn't understand was that I was trying to be a mother the way my mother was, or a mother the way your mother was, or whatever. But I had never asked, what do I want to be as a mother? And where am I going against it? And I didn't understand that a moral was a principle. Remember, we practice these principles in all of our affairs. So when I come out of an inventory, I now know that one of the things is to be loving. One of those things is to be maybe curious. That's one of my biggest principles that I live by, is a curious. Before I do inventory to find out what my morals are, it's kind of like I'm walking over a footbridge without any railings. I don't know what my values are. I know what yours are. I know what my parents were. I know what my sponsors were. But what are my morals and values, and where am I going against them in any area of my life? Now, you found your morals, Devin, because I heard you talk about it on being a husband, didn't you? So you have some guide railings now in order to live in your marriage, because you brought it through some steps here, and you know you don't want to be dishonest in that relationship. Do you know how hard it is to be honest and authentic in a relationship? You know, I do. I mean, you know, that child, I finally realized when she left to go to college at 18 and she's got like 3 master's degrees. She's so brilliant, it's ridiculous. Anyway, but she would come home and I would be treating her as if she was still 18. I didn't know that. I didn't know how to have some kind of a relationship. In fact, it isn't. If you read the 12 and 12, it says, I think it's in the 8th step, I'm not sure. Yeah, it says, defective human relationships have been the cause of all of our woes, including our alcoholism. Why is it in the 8th step? Why isn't that the 2nd step? I know I don't get along with anybody. And the reason is that until you've done the first 7 steps of this program, you don't even know who you are. You're that false face trying to have a relationship. It's so funny. Boy meets girl on AA campuses, love at first sight. It isn't. You have to be well enough acquainted to find out if they're compatible mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I was just what I thought in love. The truth was, I was in lust. I wasn't in love. I didn't even know who this person was. And to have a relationship, an intimate relationship, is the most sacred thing in the world. And here I was presenting a phony person to people. I wouldn't, if you said, oh, I love chocolate ice cream, and I hated it, I would say, oh, so do I. Well, you get to know someone long enough, they're going to find out you don't like chocolate ice cream. But I had this persona that I pushed out because I wanted what I wanted when I wanted it. And I didn't feel as though I was worthy. And so I needed you to like me because I had that hole in my gut and the wind was blowing through. And I didn't feel as though anybody liked me. So I would know. I felt like a chameleon. If I watched you long enough, I would know exactly what you wanted, and then I would become it. Problem with being like a chameleon is that we get unplanned. We can't, after a while, we can't figure out what color we are. So everything starts coming out. So the 12 steps introduced me to who Mary Thayer was and how to live by principles. And one of the things is that I had to have God first, then me, then the people around me in order of their importance. I got that all wrong. I got my boyfriend first, then me, and then I'd ask God how to get what I wanted. I never went to God and then me, because you're not going to have me if I don't have God on board. So what happened is that I realized one of the first things that was my biggest problem with emotional sobriety was that I was a people pleaser. And that means that I would please you and I would hate me. So when I'm a people pleaser, this is going against all my values, I'm dishonest, I'm a phony, and I'm a liar. That's what came out of my inventory. So how was I going to get anything? Why did I do this? You see, we have a fear inventory in there. Why was I a people pleaser? Because I was afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being abandoned. I was afraid you wouldn't like me. Okay, so my sponsor would say to me, okay, so you're alone. People don't like you. What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to get depressed. I was afraid of being depressed. What happens if you're depressed? I'll probably drink, and then I'll die. And she says, okay, so now you're dead. What's going to happen? I said, Beverly, I'm dead. And she said, oh, no God? True. So remember I said, we turned our will and our lives over to the care of God. In what area of your life are you agnostic, living independent from God? Is it as a father? Is it as a husband? Is it as an employee? What area of your life are you living independent from God? Where you didn't even know that you were supposed to ask God for help there. Where have you not let God into? Is what I do today. In what area of my life am I not feeling connected? There's a promise in the 10th step where it says you're placed in a position of neutrality. Where are you not in a position of neutrality? That's going to give you a hint where you're not asking God for any help. Now, I ask a God that's a friend. I don't ask a God that's going to punish me or I'm afraid of. If I have a God that I have any of those qualities with, I'm not going to tell him what I'm up to. How can I turn my will and my life over to something that I'm afraid of? Why would I do that? So the conception of God is something that continues to grow with me. If I don't have a conception of God as a best friend, then I have to handle it. And of myself, I'm nothing. I always screw it up. I don't know about you, but I'm an alcoholic that's done it all backwards. I would go out, get drunk, be vomiting in the toilet, and then I'd ask God. I didn't ask God before I went out to help me. It's just when I screw it up. When I have a problem with my daughter, I realized that morning I hadn't asked God his daily reprieve. God, make me the mother you want me to be, not the one I think I should be. I didn't ask that. I forgot. And all of a sudden, I get kind of an irritability feeling. And immediately now, as a 10th step, I go, okay, God, what do you want me to be? Be, not do. How do you want me to be? Honest, open-minded. You see the principles in all our affairs? Where am I not being honest? Where am I not being curious? Where am I not being loving? That's how I do my nightly review, is more because we're supposed to be practicing the principles of this program. I found out I have principles. One of them is I don't want to be dishonest. I want to be authentic. Where was I not authentic today? So that's how this works for me. I have to, if I run into an area where I'm constantly trying to have it go my way, I'm really not asking for God to help me in this area. I'm asking God to do it my way. And, when it says in your 3rd step prayer, take away my difficulties so I can better do your will. It doesn't say take away my difficulties so I can get back to doing what I want. We are going to transform. We're going to be a different person than I was. And that's not always easy. So what do I believe this whole thing is about? I think this is what it is. And then I'm going to stop. I think I have a daily reprieve to find out what God wants me to be today. I don't want to put it on what I used to be or what I hope to be. I want to put it on, I think, Devin, you put it out there with step 10, where it said something about this is the proper use of God's will, what we're going to do. I remember in the early days when I would go to a meeting, they always had like a question answer, like I guess we're going to have after this. And when it came to that point where it says, here it is, I'm just going to read it. These are the thoughts which must go with us. Thy will be done, not mine. These are the thoughts which must go with us constantly. I can exercise my willpower along this line as long all I wish. It's the proper use of the will. When I was new in the program, the big question I had, and I heard many other new people would say, is this God's will or is it my will? I would hear that all the time. And I would say, I'm going to find out what God's will is. Well, finally, I realized that this line that you said is in the 10th step. By the time I've done 9 steps, I know what God's will is. It's not necessarily for me to be a people pleaser, dishonest, phony, and a liar. So you see, I now know what God's will is for me to be in a friendship if I've done all of those steps, because I'm finding out what my values and principles are that are spiritual, that are most likely God wants me to be honest and loving and kind, and love and tolerance is our code, and all of it. So those are values. I can practice that all the time, can I? But what area of my life am I not practicing it in? Is what this 10th step is. And it says the minute we see that we reverted back to those 4 things, and we're not feeling in a place of neutrality, and one of them being fear, which is really what motivated me my whole life, was fear. Do you know that? Fear. They talk about the lower power, and I used to think, God, I don't like that. And it says if there's a higher power, there's a lower power. What does that mean? And I finally found on page 67, I think it says, fear is the evil corroding thread shot through the fabric of our existence. I told you about the little gal that sat there 50 years ago, filled with fear, that I was going to look wrong, say something wrong, do something. I was just fear motivated. Behind every one of my defects of character in my inventory and what I don't like about myself, it's fear. Fear motivated me to yell at my child because I was afraid she would hurt. You see what I'm trying to say? Every single thing that I don't like about myself has been motivated because fear. And it's an evil, corroding, sounds like a lower power to me, evil, corroding thread shot through the fabric of my existence. The next page tells you there's a better way. And it's to go back to believe in some power, just to the extent we humbly rely upon our best friend and do as we think that best friend would have us. Will he enable me to match my calamity with serenity? Then it goes on to say that I'm not going to apologize to you about really believing in this, because now I want to come from faith. So the minute I find in step 10 that I'm not in a place of neutrality, more than likely I'm coming from fear. I'm not coming from faith. If I'm coming from faith and I've got God on board, because that says you entered the world of the spirit, so you've got God on board. You have some faith to do something other than you can do, but you have to learn to communicate with that presence. And that's what I've been doing the last 30 years, is to build a better relationship with that. And you know what happened for me? I'm God esteemed. I'm not other esteemed. I want you to like me. I wanted my daughter to like me. I wanted her to love me. I was given the gift that it's not necessary for her to do either one for me to be okay. Boy, that I would not have known that I could go to sleep after a big fight with her or whatever, or what all, it doesn't make a difference. Whatever problems in my life, I can go to bed and go to sleep. How does that happen? That happens when you don't have to figure it out and you realize you're not alone and you're in the world of the spirit and there is a presence, and the presence is presence and you're present with the presence. And when that happens, I'm telling you, it's the gift that this program brings. What are we to all of each other? We're all sponsors to each other. I hate the sponsor thing. I've tried to now work more and more with the fact that I never say my sponsees. I sponsor a lot of women. I have the privilege of doing that. But they're not mine, because your real sponsor is deep down inside, just as it says on page, 55? Deep down inside of every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. God is your sponsor, your best friend, the one that you really need to guide, that will guide you. And so what are we to each other? We're all candles. You know that? If I get in a dark area, I bet you I could call Bubba or anybody here and just say, I'm not feeling too good. And you would hold some light for me, wouldn't you? You would hold some light for me until I get back and connected to that presence that's present and I'm present with, and that I can't see because somehow fear has blocked me from the sunlight of that presence. You would hold that candle for me as I would hold it for you. This program is about walking shoulder to shoulder to escape disaster together. It's a program where we have a common solution. There's no S on solution. Okay, there's no S on path. We have one path, we have one solution here. And as long as we have that common solution, I can walk shoulder to shoulder with anybody in this world. I can go any place. I can be in India. I can be, on the Faroe Islands. It doesn't make any difference where I am. God is present. And he's been present for me this morning with you folks. And I'm grateful. And I always end with that one line I just quoted. Just to the extent I humbly rely on God, or I always say my best friend, and do as I think that best friend would have me, will he enable me to match calamity with serenity. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Today we'll keep the
I can't
recording
hear
on.
anything. Is anybody there?
We are here. We are here. So we'll open the floor for question and answers, Mary, if you're
I
okay
don't know.
with.
Someone's muted or I'm not hearing. One or the other.
I'm talking. You can't hear me?
I can't hear anything.
Okay.
No.
Turn up your volume.
This went off. Hang on a second. 1 second. Heather, I think if you can hear me, come help me.
What happened?
I don't know. I can't hear anything.
Funny, I could hear you. Let's try this.
Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Oh, you can't. Yeah. The speaker I had went off, I guess. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
Let me
thanks.
try and plug it in.
Don't plug it in. I don't want it.
All right.
I can hear them, I think. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
You
Good.
can hear them.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it up a little bit. There. Okay. Hi.
So we'll open the floor for question and answers. So anybody with questions can raise their hand. If anyone has questions, they can raise their hand. Somebody put a namaste, but we want. Yeah. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
I think that's a horrible thing to ask. Maybe they just want to share how they're doing. Jesus. Just, if you have a feel.
All right.
I have
Raj,
to tell you who I am. For God's sakes, tell me who you are. That's not fair.
all right. Rajkumar, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, friends. My name is Rajkumar. I'm a colleague. Okay. Yeah. What means? What is the root cause of alcoholism?
I guess we're using the wrong spirit. And some of us think, I think physically, first of all, that's a deep question. I should just spend a second with it. Personally, I feel as though an alcoholic is someone who really is very spiritual. I really do. I think we're seeking to find out deep down inside of ourselves something. And we pick up a drug or something that, they say it's the most devastating drug of all is alcohol. And physically, they've proven that some people can, drink and it won't affect them and they don't get addicted. So I think there's a physical component about it. But I also feel as though there's a mental and emotional. And I remember the reason I say this is that because I didn't have any God. I wasn't raised with any idea about God. Before I got sober, I had a situation happen with my daughter that was a physical problem. And somebody told me about this person, this religious, I don't know, spiritual person, whatever. And I followed the directions of this person whose religion was based on a book called Emmett Fox or Emmett Fox's teachings. And so I was, I prayed and did exactly what this religious person told me to do, or spiritual person told me to do. And within 3 weeks, I saw a miracle happen with my child's health. And I knew that there was some kind of a power at that time. And I was drinking daily. I was a drunken mother. And I remember I got the book Around the Year with Emmett Fox. And little did I know that Emmett Fox's writings were part of our original AA group before the big book was even written. Emmett Fox's works. Now, for some reason, 3 years before I got into this program, I was reading Emmett Fox. And on that book is a mark on the cover of that book that was my scotch glass. And I would drink, I would read spiritual stuff, and then I would put my glass on that book. And I was a drunken saint. I was God blessing everything. Just God blessing everything. And then I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and this person said to me, "You're kind of like a bird flying around, blessing everybody." Says, "You have no legs, and one day you're going to crash." And I thought to myself, I don't want to do that. He said, God would have our head in the clouds with him, but our feet firmly planted on this plane. That's where our fellow travelers are. So again, Alcoholics Anonymous taught me how to live and be with people, to meet them where they are. When I was 16, 17 years sober, I went to a school that was the only school in the world on death and dying. It was a school by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who brought hospice to the United States. It was, she was famous for the 5 stages of grief that most people know. And I had the great opportunity of going to that school and learning a lot about death and dying, and at the same time, learning more about living in life, which is kind of a paradox. But I started to realize that this illness that we have, AA, is the only place that brought me to a God that is one of a friend. And, actually, that AA deals with us physically, mentally, and spiritually. Okay, all those. There's quadrants that we deal with dying. And so I started to see how this was like all encompassing. And I had a kit of spiritual tools to get a dent into what was happening. So what do I think alcoholism is? I think it's for people who have had their spirit broken. I think that's why we call it a language of the heart. I think that's why people who don't mix, so to speak. So I think my truth on it, I think it's the gift that was given to us, because this world is in a very, very hard place. And do you ever notice all these spiritual people like Father Richard Rohr, Father Keating, there's a Jewish man, Rami Shapiro, they all write about our 12 steps. Isn't that funny? All these religions, and yet we're the ones doing it. I think we have a message. I don't think Alcoholics Anonymous is for me anymore. I used to think it was all about me. I don't. I think it's for you people and myself to carry a message to somebody who's not been able to get a crack on their acorn cap and realize there's some light in this world despite all the pain and the loneliness and the horrendous, that we can walk shoulder to shoulder with folks. So what is alcohol? What is the root of it? I would say it's self-centeredness and selfishness. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Karthik, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Karthik. Thank you so much for organizing, and thank you so much for sharing. Sorry for joining late. I have a question. I really identified with the way you told about people pleasing. I do the same thing again and again and expecting the different results. It leads me to dishonesty and lying about it and beating up myself in the end. Can you please explain like how to overcome that people pleasing character defect? Thank you so much.
Somebody's going to have to repeat that question to me.
Yeah. So he also suffers from people pleasing. Okay. And he really related to you. So he keeps repeating the same thing over and over again, beating himself up. So he wants to know how do you get out of this people pleasing?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you, how long are you sober? May I ask you that?
You're on mute, Karthik. Unmute yourself.
Coming November, it will be 5 years now. I'm 5 years sober. Yeah.
5 years? Is that what you said, 5 years? Congratulations. When I turned 5 years sober, I stood at the podium and said, oh my God, I've just scratched the surface. It was like I was just coming to. Oh my God, I do have resentment. Oh my God, how can I act the way I do? This is not an easy thing. Nothing's funny when we're going through it, but later on, you're going to start to laugh at some of the things you did. It's not funny when we're going through it. And when I got to be 5 years sober, I realized I was a horrific, awful mother Do you know that? I could be just wonderful to you folks at the meetings and go home and be a screaming, raging nut. I didn't like that of myself. And I remember I used to keep a journal, and I wrote in the journal over and over and over again, God, please help me from yelling at my child. Why do I do this? I feel so terrible. And oh, it was just awful. And I just kept doing it over and over. And I had this journal, as I said, I was writing in it every night. And one night I sat down and I read what I wrote. And I thought to myself, well, for God's sakes, Mary, if you just stop yelling at your child, you'd be all right. Because I thought, well, I really want to do that. And so then this is my experience, and you have to do this. I can't do it for you. You can't believe me. You have to realize there, as long as you're drawing closer to this God and doing this deal, he's trying to reach you, or he, she, shim, whatever the energy is. I don't care what it is. It's trying to reach you. But you have to be completely ready to surrender that your way isn't working when you got in here, in order to let go of alcohol, just like I did. I had to admit to my innermost. It took me 9 months because your people kept saying, come back. That was lovely. I loved it. But when I was about 9 months sober, something happened and it wasn't right, and I wanted to go and drink. And I can remember I was ready to get a bottle, and this voice in my head said, how are you going to thank all those people that have been nice to you? And I thought to myself, you can't thank them. And then this voice said, yes, you can. And I said, how? And it said, you don't drink. Now that was my first conscious contact with some presence that was present with me, and I didn't even know it was present with me. But that's what happened. So when I got to this thing, I said, well, okay, I will drink if I don't stop doing these things that hurt me. And Bev would say to me, stop doing the things that hurt you. I had no power. Lack of power was my dilemma. So how was I going to get to that? And so I remember I prayed and prayed and prayed. And then one day my daughter slid across the floor. I just waxed the floor and she hit my arm. I was in the kitchen and I cut myself with this knife. And I looked down at her and she must have turned white as can be. And I looked at her and I said, honey, when mommy's cooking in the kitchen, it's not a good time to be sliding around on the floor. And in myself, I went, who said that? Because I realized for the first time that there was a presence that's present and will help me if I ask. Now, it doesn't happen in my time frame. And so one of the things I had to do is to learn how to, my sponsor, God love my sponsor. One day I was having a fit and my daughter actually called my sponsor, handed me the phone. And she said, what's the matter with you? And I was screaming about you. She says, you're in a dry drunk. She said, put the phone down and go out and take a walk. So I had to do things like that. It didn't happen completely overnight. That one time made me realize there was something trying to work with me. But if I had been acting like a parent the way I was acting like a parent for those first 5 years, I remember I finally, in my heart and soul, said, God, I don't want to be the mother I am. Bigamy, she's 15 by now. She was 10 when I came in, 9, 10. Now I decide I want to be a mother. And I'm telling you, it's been a day at a time for 50 years to be the best mother she'll ever have. What can I tell you? Yeah, I was rotten, nutty, crazy mother. Today I'm not. In fact, she even said that to me recently. She says, you're not a bad mother now. I said, thanks. Glad to hear it, And we really have a good relationship. But if I walked 7 miles into the woods, I had to come out 7 miles. I have to do this daily. I have to look for what was the meaning-making moment that I did today where I didn't hurt somebody. And I'm telling you, if you continue to beat yourself up when you're doing your nightly review, it's on page 86. It says, don't do that. You'll be of no use to anybody. I promise you, if you are aware you don't like doing what you're doing, and you have prayed about that, God knows that's painful to you. And it'll wake you up that you fell asleep somehow during the day and just forgot to ask. The main thing is, people used to say, well, I don't meditate. Says the only reason you fail at that is if you never try again. So every day you have to try. And yeah, I think emotional sobriety doesn't just happen. It is a result of doing things that you don't want to. So go against yourself a little bit. If you get up and you know you have to shovel the walk or sweep the floor or whatever, go do it and then see what happens. But ask your best friend to go with you. Just keep asking. And gradually you can claim, as it says, we claim spiritual progress, not perfection. So I don't have perfection today, but I have a daily reprieve. And most days I do okay. I hope that helped. The main thing is you're asking and you're aware that maybe you don't want to be what you're doing. I think we don't give enough credit for that. We don't give enough credit for just admitting. We have to have some credit that we surrender to the fact that we don't know what we're doing. Boy, that's a big gift. Just pat yourself on the head on that one. Anybody? Is this about over?
Yeah, we're almost over the time, but yeah, if unless we have a burning desire or a burning question, we will probably end the meeting. Okay, I'm asking again, if anybody has a burning desire or a burning question, we can take probably 2-3 minutes for that.
Thank you, Mary. Love you, Mary. Did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary.